Yeah, hello. Today I'm talking with Craig Brown. We talked about the good and bad aspects of using jargon. We also talked about jig-jagging work to learn something everywhere.
I'm Els Van Eeckhaut from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you like today's interview, don't forget to click it. Hello everyone, and with me I have Craig Brown. Actually, I think it's how to pronounce. Is it Craig, or how should I pronounce it?
You can pronounce it however you like. I call myself Craig.
Craig. Okay, so that's
Yeah.
yeah. Usually, I try to remember to ask it before we start, but I forgot already a few times now. So, but yeah, it's also a nice way to think about it. But before we go into that, I want to show people where is it. I should really move a little bit. I want to show where I am and where you are, and somehow there is a problem with my mouse. So I'm here in Belgium, and you're all part the other part of the world, and we're going to Melbourne, which is my father used to say, if you put a stake in the ground, you can actually go to the complete opposite of the world like this. And let's bring you back again on the screen. Where are you? Oh, why can't I? This is interesting. I can't hide it. Yeah, this is the way you hide hidden. And on my side, it's just a little 1 minute before 10 o'clock in the evening. And on your side, what's it on time on your side?
1 minute before 7 a.m.
So we're really at the opposite part of the world.
That's right.
Like we just
Sunny
said,
morning.
it's only morning there. My window is already closed, so my blinds already closed. Actually, yeah. So by the time this is finished, I will probably go to bed, and you just got up, and you have your coffee to wake up, and I have my coffee to be awake or to stay awake. So again, all these nice things. And this is one of the reasons why I like so much doing this kind of things, because it allows me to connect to people a little bit all over the world. And I jumped kind of into it, but let's introduce yourself. Who are you, and what do you want people to know about you?
My name is Craig Brown. Today, I am a co-founder and I run a software product development agency called Everest Engineering. Most of our customers are in Southeast Asia, Australia, and the United States. One day, we'd love to have customers in Europe. We've got team members across Southeast Asia, India, Australia, and America as well. So that's kind of our footprint at the moment. We started about 5 years ago, and it's been a pretty interesting journey, kind of melding running a business with the practices and principles around agile development and agile teamwork that I've picked up over the last couple of decades. I started working in agile in around 2003, I think it was, when I noticed these characters every morning next to me were standing up in this circle and having this, semi-religious ceremony. And my friend Andrew
What are
was
they
one of the team
doing?
members. Yeah. They were just like, everyone was sitting at their office doing work, and these guys would just like stand up at like about 9:30, go stand in a circle and chat to each other. And they had this little temple that they were worshipping in the middle as well. What they were actually doing is they were doing software and hardware together. They're doing it one of those ticket machines. When you walk into a bank or something like that, you press a button for the type of job you want to do, and it gives you a ticket, and then it'll call your number out at the roof. And they were working on that product. Anyway, I asked my friend Andrew what they were doing, and he introduced me to the marvels of XP, and then I learned more and more over the next couple of years. I'll talk about that more later. I believe the reason I'm here is because people have, in Australia or in the world, I've bumped into a lot of people in the agile community over the years, and my contribution to that is I've been running meetups and conferences in Australia since about 2000. It's a long time now, 2012 maybe, the conferences, and 2010 the meetups. And so I've had a hand in curating what people think is agile in Australia. Of course, it's different today because all the big consultancies have rolled through with their playbooks and so forth. But there's at least a few thousand people that I've been able to influence in their thinking and behaviors. So yay me.
Wow, that's already a nice story. And 2003, Yeah, the manifesto was barely born, 1 year old. We call that an infant, I think, in English. So that's really the start of Agile. So that's already, yeah, that's now 20 years. So that's a nice, yeah, it's a big
I was
grown
thinking
up.
about it the other day. I was trying to remember what month. I was trying to remember what month that like Andrew told me about what they were doing, and I should give him a call actually and try to remember because yeah, it was so long ago. But yeah.
Yeah, this kind of things, the memories, we kind of know. We're already happy that we know the year. And I do remember in 2005, 2006 thinking, I started actually doing it in before the year 2000, because my first introduction into Agile is I was trying to create a screensaver, and creating a screensaver is testing that is kind of boring. So I wrote some functions that tested my functions, and I was proud because I thought, oh, I've invented someone. And then someone else told me, well, Eve, there's actually people who are doing exactly that, and it's called extreme programming. And so this is how I got into that whole industry. And I remember in 2006, 2007, I felt like, okay, this is already so long that I've been doing it. It's probably almost going to be over. And now look at us, 2023, and we're still doing it in one way or another. Some people might disagree on how different it is, but yeah,
it's because I remember like reading the stuff that you used to post online around in I think it was maybe in 2004 or 5 I started doing a master's degree. I've got all these stories that are just popping into my head, but I moved from Sydney to Melbourne, and I started doing a master's degree mainly because when I was living in Sydney, I used to go out. I used to be in this share house and go out and hang out with friends, and we'd have Sunday nights at home, and every other night we'd go out and have dinner in restaurants and visit people and all that sort of stuff. Very active at social life. And I moved to Melbourne, and I didn't have that same social network, so I decided to do a master's degree to occupy 2 of my weeknights. And I chose project management, not because it was a particularly interesting topic to me. I was working in it, but like mainly because it was close to where I worked, and it was Tuesdays and Thursday nights. A bizarre choice, but I really enjoyed doing the degree. It was in construction project management, as a matter of fact. And during the course of that,
so completely outside software.
Yeah. I was really just looking to meet people because, like, I was living in a new city, and like intellectually curious about things in general, and like it had to do with my work because it's still project management. But like a couple of things I learned during that degree were really interesting. One thing is like I did a pretty kind of rigorous comparison of good project management practices to what was emerging as good agile practices at the time, and when I studied that, the only thing I really stood out as different is fixed sprints, like time boxed working, as the real strong contrast. And then like looking into that, like I found a lot of good agile practices, maybe more in the management side than the software side, I think, because that's where my focus was. But like were just a package or a roll up of good practices. But with this notion of like do everything in small batches so that the feedback cycle comes in and then you suffer the consequences of poor quality faster. So I thought that was really interesting. But before I dive too deep down that path, let me tell you another story, Eves. You were talking about like, before the Agile Manifesto, what was my experience of Agile? I had a similar thing, and was it Agile or was it not Agile? Because in the late 90s, early 2000s, before I'd even heard of this Agile stuff, before I'd heard of XP or the Manifesto or anything, I used to work at a phone company called Optus, and several times the people in the business had gone to their IT department, and who had then gone on to their strategic IT vendors, and they'd come back with these like, oh, we can solve that for you, but it'll be like tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. And then the business people would go, well, I can't afford that. And I was just kind of hanging around being this generally useful character. And I'd go, let me have a look at it. And I'd grab 2 people and we'd give ourselves a 3-month window to deliver a result. And we would like, we wouldn't pay attention to particular technical practices. Like, there was a certain level of hygiene that was applied, but like really it was about work close with the business and work in short cycles. right? And I remember one particular project we worked on. There was this process of porting phone numbers from one company to another. Like, you know, these days everyone assumes that it's normal, but in those days it was like a new thing in Australia. And
my side, yeah. Now you're back. Okay.
Anyway,
yeah,
like I don't know if you heard the rest of it.
I don't know how far it got recorded. So, what were?
I'll give you the shorter version of that story, and then we can just kick on to the next thing. So, in the intro, you were talking about like the agile pre-manifesto days, and I was thinking about this just the other week. What was my experience before the manifesto, before I'd heard of it? And I worked at Optus at a phone company, and I was one of these guys that would turn up and do these quick win projects. And one of them was we were porting telephone numbers from one phone company to another, and there was this process that involved faxes and paper moving from one company to another. And then these people would do this data entry into these green screens, which was this cross-company interface. And there were, I think there was like hundreds of people doing this data entry, and the organization wanted to automate a chunk of that, and they'd gone and asked the usual IT vendors, and the usual IT vendors had come back with tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in costs. I can't remember anymore. Me and two guys sat down, and we studied the process. We did the work in the processing center with the people, and we worked in iterations. We looked at the process, and there was basically 6 screens that people filled out, and there were errors that would pop out at each screen, and then rework would happen and so forth. And so we decided to give ourselves a goal of like 6 weeks to finish the project, 1 week for each of those steps. I think we were like 8 weeks instead of 6 weeks. So as usual, IT project overrun. But it was fun, right? Because we were in there working directly with the people that would use the tool. We were collaborating directly with the business. We were working in iterations. We were working in short cycles. And so that was the vector that I came into agile practices from. Not that that was my way of doing agile. That was just my way of working that I'd established when I discovered XP and Scrum. Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah, I like that kind of story, because many people, well, like you said, the waterfallish way, the bigger thing that was the good way of working. And then we had lots of people trying to figure out, okay, how can I do it in a smaller way with lesser people? And a lot of us, we kind of run into the similar kind of thing. Oh, let's just talk to the person that wants something. Let's do it 1 week after the other, get a lot more feedback. And some of us created a methodology out of it. Let's put it like that. And others adapted or saw it and heard about it and said, oh, that's actually better than what I'm doing. But a lot of us inspired each other, I would say.
Yeah, it was fun. There was a lot of learning going on in those days. Like in that story, it was quite fun for me too, because as we were doing the project, I would always offer this disclaimer: this isn't scalable. This isn't supported by IT. This doesn't have all the right, ilities, non-functional requirement things. It's not like ready to roll out to masses of users. But on the other hand, it didn't need to, because it was all about like reducing the number of people that needed to do work. I was always disclaiming this is not an official IT project. And then 4 or 5 years later, one of my friends from high school went to work in that processing center. And like in a conversation over dinner one night, he just told me about the tool that he was using. And I was like, oh, my team built that and it's still going. That's fantastic. So
I think a lot of shadow IT, how I call a lot of these things, are sometimes way too long around. But at the same time, if it's doing the trick that it's doing, why would you need a more official whatever that is actually a lot more cumbersome and creates a lot more bureaucracy than whatever tool is doing the work.
Okay. Like I recall that little project we did saved, I think there was about 120 people in the processing center, and a lot of them were backpackers and itinerants and travelers and temporary workers and so forth. And they kind of come in and out with peak demand as marketing activities went in. But we pulled that down to, I think, about 15 people. And
probably with a lot less errors in the thing that was produced. I think that's also what
that's right. Yeah, so we've connected to revenue and so forth as well. Yeah.
Let's move to that.
Anyway, old war stories, right?
First official question: what is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
Well, I think actually when I I was a bit of an organizer and a hustler, and a very people-oriented person when I went to university in the early 90s. And I had a lot of fun. Like at one point I was involved in organizing bands and student unions and all that sort of stuff. And then when I left, there was this big recession on in Australia, so it was quite hard to get a job. So I spent a few years working hospitality or working as a waiter or cleaner or stuff like that. And eventually I took a job in a call center working at Optus. And so I was like on phones helping people with, internet tech support or, pay TV tech support or stuff like that. And eventually evolved into this, got recruited into this process improvement team. And then that kind of, evolved into the IT career. But those couple of years in Optus were really formative, like, basically, connecting yourself directly to the customer experience. And then there were two managers that I had that were quite influential right at the beginning of my career. And so formative things for me were working with Annette Fink and Andrew Murray. And they were two managers that I had in my first 12 months, 15 months at Optus. And both of them were brilliant, very different styles, but they modeled a behavior that I've been able to appreciate over the years, which is we're paid to serve the customer, right? And so just linking everything back to that has been really influential for me.
And you just made me remind, at the end of the 90s, beginning 2000, that's also for most people, the beginning of the internet. I mean, that were the days that the internet was starting. So I can assume that when you do customer support at that kind of level, that most of the people that were trying to use it had maybe no idea even what that internet thingy was and how to connect it to computers. Did I see that correct, or was that completely different?
Yeah, that's totally true. Like, I mean, I remember playing online games in the late 80s and 90s where you'd plug your phone in and, dial your friend's house and so forth. And then in, I don't know, 93 or 4, getting a home internet connection and starting to work with that and, playing around and trying to build websites and do all that sort of stuff. It was an interesting time. When I went into the workforce, the level of literacy that the general population had around technology was pretty low, right? Like it was a very small set of people that were playing around in this sort of stuff. And going into that tech support stuff was kind of interesting as well, because for pay TV, it's just a TV service. But for people using the internet, it was right at the cusp of that mass adoption of like internet in every home. And one of the jobs is like Optus bought an ISP. And I was recruited to go and work at that ISP for a while to kind of indoctrinate the people into the Optus way of working, training the tech support and supporting people into how to be more customer centered and customer service skills and stuff like that. And I remember sitting over the shoulder, listening to somebody's call, and she's listening to a customer and they're going, "It's a blue screen. I don't know what to do." And it's like, have you tried this? Have you tried that? And all these things aren't working. "Are there any words on the screen?" she asks. And the customer reads them out. And it's like your pay TV service has been disconnected. Call this number to pay your bill and start again, or some message similar to that. And somehow the call had been routed into the internet company as well. So bumping into weird problems like that was fun as well. That's that classic, like, pull it out from the PowerPoint and start again from the very first step type problem solving.
I've done 2 years of telephone support for a particular small little company, but I remember that we had a lot of people that could barely use a computer. I remember this was even a DOS program, and I remember that when we moved to Windows, I had to explain to a manager how to use a mouse, and I literally said to someone, "Okay, you use the mouse and you click there," and he actually pulled up the mouse and clicked the screen, because that's what I literally said. But of course my idea was, okay, you point the mouse pointer to there and now you click with your left mouse click. But he actually used the mouse to touch the screen, which was I was like, what? And then I realized, but that's exactly what I said. But for someone who never used the computer and never used the mouse, it felt logical that that was what I asked him to do. So I realized very quickly, okay, I have to scale back and think, what are the words I'm using when I'm talking to people who've never used these kind of devices?
Yeah. I think they're really important and valuable skills. And one of the ways it's kind of manifested long term for me is like avoiding jargon and speaking in plain language. Yeah, or probably a more industry friendly way of saying that is speaking in the language of the customer.
Yeah, well, I remember a few years later that a friend of mine who's a lawyer and a really smart woman had some problem with the internet as well, and so she called tech support, and they told her something, and by coincidence I was there in the evening, and she rambled on and complaining and blah blah blah, and then she said, and at the end they said to reboot, and then she stopped, and I said, okay, do you know what that means? No, and it's still not working. I say, oh, you just have to shut down your computer and restart it. Oh, why didn't they tell me? And so she went downstairs to try it, and so she came back up. Now it's working. It's like, yeah, okay.
That's classic. Yeah, that's so.
And this is a very smart woman, but the tech support said it in a very techie way, and she didn't understand it, but she didn't even felt that she could say to this person, I don't understand, because she was so much used to hearing jargon that they assumed that she needed to understand. It's
funny, isn't it? Yeah, jargon is really interesting, isn't it? Because we use so many words and we think they're normal, but they're jargon to people outside our little circle.
Yeah, but
imagine talking to people about sprints and scrums and stand-ups and all that sort of business.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's helping, of course, because if you're in tech support and the person you talk to knows what rebooting means, it actually is a fast word to say a lot of things at the same time. And that's why jargon is interesting if you're talking to people from your own little world. But if you do tech support, just like if a doctor explains something to a patient, a doctor should not use all these technical terms to me when he's talking about, I don't know, cancer or something else. I prefer that he or she uses language that is, what I would say baby English or baby Dutch or whatever language that that person is talking to me. But we're so used to using jargon, and like you say, in Scrum and in Agile, we invent all kind of things that makes it even harder, because sometimes, velocity is such a word that for me it took me a few months to actually understand what it meant, because I'm not native English, so I when I heard velocity for the first time, I looked it up in the dictionary what it meant, and I still didn't understand what Agile meant with that, and it took me a while before all the dots clicked for me, because that was a word and I could translate it, but still it was like, but what's the difference between speed and velocity? And so there was a lot of things that I needed to know there.
Yeah. Language is so interesting. I was talking to Alistair one day, and how he is a bit multilingual. He was Raci, right? Like responsible, accountable, and other stuff. And noticing that, like in Spanish, Raci, responsible and accountable, there's no real distinction in that language. And so not just jargon, but also international teams, the way we speak to each other and the assumptions we make about the words people use is really interesting. We need to learn to slow down and unpack that as a natural way of working. But so quick, we're so quick to just jump to assumptions about how language works. For me, that's interesting because there's that notion of metaphor out of XP, and I have a love-hate relationships with metaphor, because I remember using it to great effect on some projects sometimes where you go, oh, it's just like on Facebook, the newsfeed and blah, blah, blah. And people just go, yeah, cool, got it, right? And it shortens down that conversation so dramatically. But on the other hand, there are these other metaphors that get played out over and over again, and they abstract away from the specific. And the specific is useful because that's what we're talking about. And we're all on the same team and we understand the language of the industry. So let's talk to the specific. So yeah, it's definitely a thing around being mindful of where you're at and who you're with.
And they can create confusions. I still remember we used to have this, and a lot of people might have this from my childhood. We had this little Fisher Price telephone with red horn, a famous thing, play a toy. But the red horn was connected with a cord to the rest of the telephone, because that's how telephones used to work. Remember, a horn, a cord, and then you had to have a dial thing. And I remember my son explaining to his brother why the cord was there. And at that time, all the phones in our house were wireless, so we didn't have a phone with a connection. So he explained to his brother that, and very seriously, like, yeah, but this is connected with that cord, because that way we can't lose the horn, and these things are always staying together, because dad and mom, we always lose where the phone is and whatever. And he was explaining it. Yeah, I was like, wow. Because he doesn't have a memory of a phone with a connection. It was like, wow, this is interesting. And yeah, it's a different metaphor, and he kind of invented his story around it. What was was really interesting.
Isn't that a great example of people finding meaning where there's an absence of it? That's another great thing, isn't it? Like our quest for meaning in life, right? I can't remember the name of it, but that book of that psychiatrist that went to the camps in World War II. I read it during the pandemic. It was, despite it being a terrible story, it was a healthy thing to read at that time. But his thesis
from Frankl. What is it?
Frankl.
Yeah, exactly.
His thesis, of course, is like
meaning. The man in search
of meaning. Yeah, that's right. And so his thesis is we all look for meaning. We have to find meaning in life, because otherwise, how do we find purpose and reason to live? But it's up to us individually to find our own meaning. And so we're looking at all these patterns and this chaos around us, and we're going, well, why, right? I wonder if that connects to people like you and me as well. Like, here we are, like we could live a normal, easy life, like doing our IT or technology industry careers, and then we discover this agile thing, we trip over it, and we see how, like a lot of agile evangelists talk about their early days where they, tried using these techniques and methods, and then they see it liberate people, workers, I guess, to put a Marxist lens on it, right? And all of a sudden people are empowered and able to make decisions, and they're engaged in their work, and they're happy to turn up, and they like working with each other, versus like a few months before where there are all these individual drones that turn up, sit at a computer and type and don't talk to anyone, and have a miserable day at work and then clock off and have a nice evening. Why did we get involved in this stuff? Why did we get curious about it, and why did we get enthusiastic about it? I don't know.
Well, it's one of the questions later on, so I'm curious to hear your answer to that part. I want to move to that second question. That if you had not been doing what you've been doing now, do you have any idea what could have become of you? Because you talked already a little bit about university, working with bands and stuff like that. Was there anything else that you were destined to become?
Probably when I was like 17 or 18, I could imagine myself being in a band, or being a writer or something in the creative arts. My mum was very she had her day job, which was like working in an office, but she was very enthusiastic about creative arts. And I think that, had an influence on my expectations of what I could become. I grew up in a economically disadvantaged area in Australia, like a regional area with a lot of unemployment and stuff like that, and not a lot of white collar work. Hospitality and labor and construction and stuff were the main industries around. So that probably wasn't going to be entertaining or stimulating for me. So I probably was thinking my future would go down that path. But then I went to university, studied business, and then I ended up working in a call center doing tech support, and then one thing led to another. So thinking about that, and thinking about this is a very creative industry, and also thinking about like the mushrooming of the technology industry over the last 30 years, I'm pretty sure I would have ended up in technology one way or another. I think for me, the difference is every 3 or 4 years in my early part of my career, I changed from one place to another. So I'd leave the company and I'd go work somewhere else. And so that led to this zigzagging career where I'd go different places and I would learn things. And moving across different organizations gave me these broader perspectives and let me see patterns and let me work with those patterns in terms of building solutions and generating options and ideas to solve problems. And I think the alternative for me would have been to sit in the one company, I would have been, noticed and respected and elevated and promoted up through, and I'd be probably some executive in some big company. That would be my alternate path. But I think that would have been less creative and stimulating, and I'd, have 2 houses and holidays every year and a couple of kids and all that sort of. I mean, I have a kid and I have a house, but I didn't choose that more stable career. I chose diversity, I guess.
Yeah, and I think if you look, I don't know how it is with your parents, but if I look at my parents, they had a rather stable. My mother had like 2 jobs in her whole career. My father worked in basically in 2 or 3 companies, depending on how I count. But yeah, that is very stable. Like you say, I've changed also a lot more in the beginning of my career, swapping to different kind of roles. I think this is kind of, but it feels at least that our kind of generation, we moved around a lot more, trying to learn zigzag, like you call it. I like that word, finding things. So that is, I don't know if it's typical for agilists or our generation or something like that, but there's a lot more people that I interview here that have something similar. Some had a big idea on what to become, but most of us, like you say, we swap around and we learn something everywhere. And it kind of brings me to that next thing, is that what is currently, or what is one of your big challenges, and well, at least a big challenge that you want to talk about, because of course this will stay on the internet for the eternity, so you might not want to talk about everything, but that's up to you. And you're back.
Right. I wonder what is causing the signal to waver in and out. Anyway, I'll pick up. I think I'll pick up from there. I was in 2003 learning about agile, and I went and learned a bunch more stuff and kind of figured out some stuff and tried to use a few things. But I realized at around that time that if I kept going the way I was going, I probably only had about 10 more projects left in my career. And I was worried that, like, how much am I going to learn, and how rewarding is that going to be to have only done a handful more things? And so I decided to focus on doing the smaller, more incremental things. And despite that, so the projects got smaller, but then what happens with my career is I learned more and grew in my experience. And then the problems that I tried to tackle got bigger and more complex. And so the feedback cycle to what does good look like is still getting longer, which is interesting. But it means the challenges are bigger and harder as well. And so the current challenge, I think, is the hardest one that I've done, which is we're trying to grow this global software agency and hang on to being an excellent place to work for our employees, being an excellent partner to work with for our customers, and to hold on to the attributes, particularly the cultural attributes that make that successful as we grow. Right? We don't aspire to be a 20,000 person organization, but what we do aspire to be is an organization that's got a footprint in all the major continents and all the major markets around the world, so that we can work with interesting people all over the world. Right? So that's the hard problem. That's the hardest thing that I've tried so far.
Exactly. The culture is different in all kind of cities already, and countries and continents even more. I can imagine that's the thing. And so the second part of that question is that why is that a good thing for you in that challenge, working with these cultures, working across the globe? What's good about that for yourself?
When I started working internationally, Melbourne is the opposite end of Europe, right? And the world is a big place. And when you get on a plane and you leave Melbourne and you go to Sydney and Melbourne, they're just the same. Sydney's just got better beaches. Melbourne's got better bars. But when you get on the plane and go to another continent, right, and you land in Los Angeles or Singapore or Berlin or wherever, the order of magnitude of what's going on is just significantly larger. And so you look around and you smell the air of the new city, and you see the hustle that's going on in that city, and you see new buildings and new foods and new fashions and all that sort of stuff, and you just appreciate how diverse and interesting the world is. And then you start to meet people as you travel around the world, right? And the most interesting people in the world, to me, everyone's got their own set of interesting people, but the most interesting set of people to me are evenly distributed around the world. They're not all in Melbourne. They're not all in Australia. There's brilliant people in Belgium, in Florida, in Bangalore, right? Like, you know, and it's fun to meet those people and spend time with them. So like, you know, it's not, we're going to conquer the world and be the best company in the world. It's, we want to be connected to the most interesting and fun people that we can get our hands on. So I think that's kind of more the vibe.
Yeah, I like that. I like that because indeed, yeah, it's our world is shaped, and how we think about things are shaped with the experiences that we have and with the other people that we meet. And yeah, earlier on we talked about languages, and I've noticed, for example, that for me working with other non-native English speakers is sometimes easier than with native English speakers, because all of us, we go back to that same kind of what I call baby English. So simpler English, and we don't use all these words that have, or we might use words that have multiple meanings, but most of us, we only know a few meanings of these words. And if I now talk with someone from London, UK, that is yeah, immersed in all these different kind of facets of English, I might not always understand them. The other side is, when I work with them, I start to learn much more of these facets. So that's really an interesting way of collaborating with people from different countries. All of a sudden you realize, a little bit like what you said earlier on, what Alistair said about Raci, the fact that in the Spanish language, that these two words, yeah, they don't exist as different words, is very similar. In French, we have something similar with effective and efficient. Technically, they exist. The two words exist in French, but everybody using one word for both meanings. So it's very complex for most French people to understand that difference. And that's all these kind of things make us, these kind of cultures make us really, or at least me, and that's what I hear with you as well, rethink our own cultures. Rethink about, what does that actually mean for me?
And despite different cultures and different places and other demographics creating differences, I think they're more about making interactions interesting. This is like, being barriers to overcome. Because when I work with people around the world, like I find, once you can overcome maybe some foundational language barriers, once you can talk to each other, there's way more similarities and common things that we all have with each other than differences, right? Like it's easier for me to find someone who's very different from me in Melbourne than it is to find someone different from me in our industry anywhere in the world, right? Because there's a thing that brings us together in the way we do work, in the way we think. Like I remember, a few years ago joking with a friend when I was doing all this international work, and he said, "What's the biggest cultural difference you've ever come across?" And I said, "It's between product managers and engineers," right? It was a flippant remark, and I don't think it's actually true, but like, it was just the thing that I was noticing. Where are their differences? And, it's,
and you have that in all kinds of cultures. I mean, that's not different in Melbourne than it is in Belgium or than it is in London. So that's it's a very important remark, because typically when we focus to work with other people from different cultures, people think about these cultures, country cultures, and of course it's not that it's not there, but the cultures inside our company already might be completely different between two departments. And that's a really nice example about two different roles that have a hard time finding each other. And if you're two engineers, most developers, if they know more or less the same language, it doesn't matter from which country you are, put them together and they will immediately start connecting, and or they might have a religious fight about whatever way to comment code, but they are immediately connected one way or another. That's the interesting part.
There was a guy I was talking to at our company last year, and he told me this story. He during the pandemic, he took up running. So at dawn, he would get up and go for a run every day. This is over in Bangalore. And I don't know, IBM or something like that, right? What brings the people of IBM together, right? Maybe it's their blue IBM t-shirts or something like that. And they see that in the street and they know that person across the road is one of them. And there's this connection, right? There's an appreciation for them. And there's this recognition that they know some things that you know, and that brings you together, even though you've never spoken to them. So I think that's really, really interesting.
We had again some connection problems, but that they seem worse than typically had. But let's see how much is recorded. I don't know, of course. Let's hear. I got the story, or I got big parts of the story, but I'm not sure I got everything. So that's and I don't know how the recording was. So that's the interesting part.
Hang on a minute. Yeah, I'm sure it's here. Don't worry about it. We'll just do our best.
Yeah, we'll see what we can do. It's interesting because it's the other part of the world, but at the same time, it's what I would still consider one of the better connections and countries to have connections with. So that's a little bit strange. And I assume also on your side, the not everything has been started as the world of work, so I don't expect a lot of things.
Australia has an interesting story about the internet. If you'd like to hear it, I'll just give you the brief version. In I don't know, in about 20 something years ago, the government decided it needed to roll out a fiber network backbone across the country. And what their intention was is to connect fiber right to the house on every single house in urban Australia. There's regional areas that will be different, but it's a big country. So, you know, a house that's like 1,000 kilometers away from the nearest town, it's not going to get an internet satellite, right? But all the cities and urban areas around the cities would get fiber connections. And then there was an election, and the Conservative Party argued that it was too expensive and we shouldn't connect broadband to the fiber broadband to the house because nobody needs it. It's only there for playing games and pirating movies. And so they cut us off, right? So that last 200 meters to your house is a throttle on your internet using the telephone networks from 70, 80 years ago. So frustrating.
And so they didn't do anything in this next 10, 20 years to solve that, because
we've had that rollout started in around 2011 or 12, and then we had the Conservative government take over around then, and they just got booted out 6 months ago. But
6 months is not enough to change it again.
hopefully somewhere in the next few years it gets fixed, but it's been a bit frustrating for all of us. Anyway, apologies for the bad connection and good luck with the editing.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, it's part of it. That's what I always said. It's part of these connections, and I never know upfront what's going to happen. So I don't want to cut out all the things. So this part might still be in it because I want to show people how we're connecting it. That's also part of what it is. So let's move to that. Actually, the one thing you kind of already alluded a little bit about it, that is what drives you. What is that part that drives you, about what you do? Because I already noticed in this conversation, you are a driven person. You have that, you want to help people, you want to do these things, but you know where some of this is coming from.
You'd like to think that, wouldn't you? I have reflected on why I am the person I am, and I don't really know. Like, I think about the upbringing you have, and I think I have a fairly archetypical upbringing for my demographic and age. I was born in 1970. In the late 70s, my parents got divorced, and I had a single mum, and I was living with her through the 80s, and we'd visit Dad during holidays. And then I went to university in around 89, 90, early 90s. Graduated, went off and bummed around doing hospitality and so forth for a few years. Went and worked in call centers, went and worked in IT, got a master's degree. Just worked my way up in terms of level of problems and challenges that I face in the industry. So I feel like in some ways pretty bog standard vanilla in terms of objective observation of who I am. But then you see these other things that I do, like the meetups and the conferences. And another thing I guess people talk about is, through the meetups, probably I've met a lot of people that have migrated into Australia or moved to Melbourne from other cities. And when people move, there's this, I'm dislocated, I'm not connected. And I've always had time to give to people who are looking to make connections and so forth. And I think my angle on that agile community stuff is very much, we need to be connected and we need to look after each other, which is a very human thing. It's not a specific agile or technology thing. And I think that's how we should live. And I try to trace that back to why I didn't grow up with wealth or privilege. I didn't grow up particularly poor or, living a radically, outside of life or anything like that. I had a lot of friends and all that sort of stuff. And I was very normal in my whole upbringing. So I don't really know why I am the way I am.
But you were still raised by a single mother, is that, or most of the time, is that what I heard?
Yeah. But on the other hand, the divorce rate in Australia around the time my parents got divorced was close to 50%. So that would make me about the same as half of my peers. So, I don't think that is a standout feature. And I really have no idea. But anyway, what I have found is that what will get me to act is helping other people, right? And supporting other people. And if there are not other people around to support, I'm quite happy sitting on the couch and watching TV or reading books. But when there's somebody that needs help, I'm very motivated to get up and help.
And is that also because you saw your mother being helped by others, or your mother helping others, or is that was completely out of your world?
No, I don't think so. She was pretty independent. She looked after herself. Like, she got a little bit of help from her parents from time to time. But no, I don't think so. So I really don't know, right? And I think that's really interesting. I used to ask people what makes leaders, and there's techniques and methods in leadership that we can learn and then we can practice. But what brings motivation to people to step forward when there's a challenge, right? If you get a handful of people, like a software team, for instance, if you get a handful of people and say, cool, here's a problem, I don't know how to solve it, what will we do? Usually somebody's already assumed that role of leader and they start leading the conversation. But if you kind of suppress their contribution or ask them to leave the room or whatever, will anyone else in that group step forward and venture into the uncertain? I think a part of it is your orientation to uncertainty. Are you averse to it? Do you find it appealing? Do you want to step into uncertainty? Because a lot of time leadership is an act of navigating uncertainty. A couple of mates of mine, Kailash Awati and Paul Colmsey, wrote a book, or a couple of books actually, but they wrote one book called The Heretic's Guide to Management. And they're funny characters because they fill their books with interesting anecdotes and they've got a laconic sense of humor. And I can never tell which business story comes from which author. But one of the books they wrote, The Heretic's Guide to Management, basically has this premise that the biggest lever as a manager you can apply to the workforce that you're managing is their orientation to uncertainty. And after I read their book, I went across the company that I was working in and grabbed the software teams in their retrospectives or planning sessions. And I ran this little exercise. And I said, can you line up, go to that wall if you love uncertainty and perhaps you kill your mother-in-law so that you could see what happens. On the other hand, go to that wall if you would kill your mother-in-law to avoid uncertainty at all costs, right? Or some variation on that. And then I'd asked the room to just kind of spread themselves out in relation to their tolerance or orientation towards uncertainty. And it was really funny because, universally over there, I don't want any uncertainty, are the ops people. And then the back end or full stack developers, and then the testers and the front end developers, and then the business analysts and product managers. And it was this whole spectrum of people had gravitated in their roles towards the degree of uncertainty that would be present in their roles, or their job role in terms of dealing with uncertainty, right? So a product manager is all about uncovering new opportunities and new uncertainties to go and discover more. And that operations person just wants to shut down all the opportunities for uncertainty so that they can keep their environment stable. So I think that was a really interesting moment for me, reconciling that book with that profile in teams. And so maybe there's something around our, as human beings, relationship with uncertainty that tells us whether we're natural leaders or not. And then I also put that in context of what's going on in our lives, right? So, launch a business, be really, really busy, have a pandemic, have an economic crisis, all those sort of things stack up on you. And do you want more uncertainty? Not really. I would really like things to be stable for a while. But what is that?
You point out something very important. That is that indeed, during the pandemic, there was so much uncertainty for a lot of people that even the people who really liked uncertainty were like, okay, it's kind of enough for now. Let's keep things stable in my company, in my life, whatever. And like this, and I think now we're going back to a more normal world. We're still kind of digesting that uncertainty and digesting all that thing. I think that's at least what I see. I don't know if you recognize that. Talking about uncertainty, it feels like we've lost connection again.
Yeah. I agree with that sentiment that you just said. And, we some of us have, it's capacity, right? So some of us have a lot of capacity for uncertainty and some of us have very little. And depending on what's poured into that bucket, how much spare capacity do we have? And then there's the recovery thing. Like, people talk about dealing with trauma, right? Like, to some degree, that's like how quickly can you unload that capacity for uncertainty out of your reservoirs. Anyway, it's interesting. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's especially with, there was the pandemic, then now we have the war. There is a lot of uncertainty about the climate, about the prices of electricity, a lot of other things, all stacked on top of each other. And I think that is why for a lot of people it stays really hard at this point, depending on how much, like you said, the reservoir has been, how do you call it, unloaded already from the pandemic. But before it was fully unloaded for most people, there were already things on top of that. You were talking about working internationally. I've worked with people from Ukraine. I've worked with people from Russia. I actually when is it in a couple of days, I'm going to go to a Belgian company that has offices both in Russia and Ukraine, and they're talking about, okay, how they dealing with people from two countries that are at war. As far as I understand, these colleagues still get along, but I can imagine that it's tense sometimes because these people get opposite information in the news, and so there's a lot of tension there, as a lot of uncertainty about their lives. So that's for a lot of people.
That's such a weird thing, isn't it? People that have been colleagues, recruited into the army and told to shoot at each other. That's bizarre, right? Like wars in the past, those international borders kept us apart, so we didn't appreciate and understand the people on the other side. But today, you could be at war with your teammate. That's just so weird.
There is actually a story about, so there was World War I happened partially in Belgium, and there's some shootings. That there is some really interesting stories that happened during the Christmas period of 1 year, where people started to, and it people think that it happened only on Christmas Eve, but it actually was something that was going on the weeks before, and people started chanting songs and things like that from one side to the other. And then over the course of a few days around Christmas, they started actually to celebrate the holiday season kind of together. And that gave a lot of troubles from both sides because they didn't want to shoot each other anymore. And so the story that I heard is that they actually had to replace or move soldiers around because they didn't want to shoot to the other side, where they have just became friends, because they realized, oh, these are not just the enemies, these are also people, and they also have children and partners and whatever. So that was our children from other people. So that's
that humanity and empathy. Yeah.
Exactly. It's and it's a little bit like what you said earlier on about agile cultures and working with people from different sides. We don't know each other, but once we take the time to get to know each other, yeah, it's we all are humans, right? So we're actually a lot more similar than we're different. And for me, one of the things that I like about agile is that we actually or at least I like to focus on what unites it, what makes it that okay. I like to talk to you, Greg. Why is it? Because you're doing similar kind of things as I'm doing. You're doing it from a different country, a different time zone, but actually there's a lot of things that unites us. So that's
Oh, actually, talking about different countries and continents and so forth, another thing I'm curious about is I've started to, over the last couple of years, started to notice there's different versions of agile in different continents. There's this emerging American agile, this emerging European agile, there's this emerging Asian agile. And I don't really know what Australian agile looks like. It's a bit like hearing your own accent. But yeah, it's just interesting seeing these different, I think they're foundational beliefs about like how work and teamwork and the workforce should be kind of, showing up in the evolution of these things. It's really interesting.
And so what would be for you an Asian agile different than an American agile? If you could just name one thing where it's different for you?
It possibly, I think the main thing for what's different between Asia and Europe and America.
I changed my video from uploading to lower quality. I'm not sure if that will change anything because I think it's more on it's more on your side, but I just did that. The resolution, I changed it. I'm not sure if that will change anything. Kind of trying to look what we could change.
Well, we're in the home run. Maybe we should just see how we go, and you harvest what you can harvest.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
So you were talking about the difference between European agile and Asian agile, and I think you said something about experience brought in from Europe, but then it got dropped.
I'll just replay it, right? So apologies, viewers, for the broken video, but as an outsider, I can't see what the Australian flavour of agile is. Just like I can't hear the Australian accent. But looking across the world, I see this flavor of American agile starting to emerge as different to the European style. And maybe it's just the online narrative, maybe at the coalface on the teams, it's quite similar. But, and what I think this is it's like small changes in culture that are just over decades are starting to manifest as observable differences. And again, like the disclaimer is like every team has its own circumstance and company culture is the dominant culture that affects these things, not international cultures. But I see the differences for me tend to play around our relationship to hierarchy. And so America has quite a stronger orientation to hierarchy than, Europeans, particularly Western Europeans that I know. And so like one of the things I see is like in Western Europe, or Northern Europe, maybe people see management as a competence or a speciality that kind of joins the team and is a part of the team. And in America, there's a boundary there between team and management, and it's a different thing. And I think maybe what that manifests as is Americans tend to focus on efficiency as the kind of superordinate motivator for agile. Can we get more done? And then in Europe, it's more about creativity. Can we find more better value for customers? And again, I think that's a very high level abstraction, and I think it's every team is unique and different and all that sort of stuff. But I sense these different patterns that are kind of distinguishing the two different schools of agile. And I think that's interesting as well, because you look at the San Francisco crowd and they don't care about agile, right? Like, unit tests and sprints are just table stakes, right? Like, that's just normal stuff, right? We don't talk about that anymore. What we do talk about instead is like, customer validation and like insights and like, measurement and all that sort of stuff. So, I think, I don't know, it's just a thing, right? And 20 years in, like, what is agile? And then we start, like recently with like, Scott Severite's thing the other year, and it's like, what's the future of agile going to be? How long do these ideas have legs? Just yesterday, as a matter of fact, I was looking at, I grabbed a podcast and started listening to some Six Sigma stuff. Remember 10, 15 years ago, people in the agile world were shitting on Six Sigma, saying, oh, don't do that, that's terrible. But it turns out there's loads of good ideas in there about like studying and measuring and diagnosing before you leap to action, and stuff around bringing stakeholders on the journey for change and all that sort of stuff. So, is Six Sigma dead? Probably, mostly, but like, is that going to happen to agile? Perhaps, right? So, but what does that mean? Doesn't matter, right? Like, we just kind of keep rolling forward, and smart people will look backwards and find good ideas and pull them into the future. And
I like the way you put that, because indeed, like, many people are implementing agile wrong. Probably what we learned about Six Sigma was people using Six Sigma in a wrong way, and that's what we thought it was. Where actually it had also good ideas, and there's definitely wrong ways of implementing it, and maybe there's parts that are not working well together with agile, but there's definitely, like anywhere, there's good parts of it. And for me, one of the things I like about the agile world is that we look everywhere and we try to say, okay, what can we adapt? And what I do think we need to do much more is recognize the sources. Where are things coming from? And I see big agile movements ignoring where they're stealing from. But I think also in general, agile, well, XP was borrowing ideas from a lot of things. Scrum was borrowing from a lot of things, and we need to make sure that we recognize where we have things that we borrowed from. I think that's something that we historically didn't always do, and I hope that we can do that better in the future.
Like the act of studying things and crediting things properly makes you think about them and understand them better. I don't think most business people give a damn where good practices come from. They just want people to execute to them.
But
the other day I was at a strategizer, like some of the, sorry, Yves, go on.
Yeah, for me, it's. I agree. The people that want to do it, they just want to learn it and to do the good things. But for me, it's also about, okay, do we understand it correctly? If I talk to the people from that create team topologies, I might understand it better than if I read it somewhere else. And I find that an interesting balance, because at one time I'm a trainer and I'm teaching stuff that I didn't invent, but at the same time and I hope that people are interested in listening to me, but at the same time, I want to learn as close from the source as possible, because I know I will understand it better. So it's a balance that is not easy, I think. Anyway, I interrupted you. You wanted to add something to that.
It doesn't matter. We can go down a different track. But actually, thinking about what the future holds is interesting, because one of the guys on my team, we've got this interesting thing where we have this crew that have got two leaders. They work at one of our clients, and I was just talking to him yesterday about they're recognized as their client as like one of their high performing teams, got called out as like a top 3 performing team. And I was asking him what it was that made that team so successful as a group. And he reflected on it, and he took a few hours, and he came back to me and he told me it's the fact that everyone on the team is motivated towards continuous learning, and that they actually support each other to learn continuously, right? So it's not just like we believe it's true, but we lift each other up and we pull each other with us. And then my next question to him is yet to be answered. He's going to come back probably today or tomorrow. And it's, what are the conditions that make that a thing, right? Like, what's led to that? Reminds me of the question you asked me about like what makes me who I am. I don't know, right? But what are the things that what are the conditions that set some teams up to be so successful, right? Different bunches of same bunch of people in a different environment won't get to the same standard, right? But there's these, what are the forces that bring it together? And I think one story around we look after each other and encourage each other to grow is really interesting. And I think, what does the future of agile look like? Well, there's so many things are changing. Like, that adaptability is probably really critical. And so, dropping agile as a concept for a moment, maybe instead saying what comes after agile, that agile and adaptability, right? That competence and that capability to, hold the team together and go on a journey together and be a real true team or crew or whatever you want to call it, is a really interesting thing to look at. So the team dynamics thing for me is really interesting. And what makes,
I like that. Yeah, for me, one of my part of that answer would definitely be, let's look into what's the psychological safety. How does it? You talked earlier on about, okay, the failure. How do we deal with uncertainty and things like that? So that's definitely interesting to look in such a team. Is there anything that bounds them? Is it actually that there are different ways of dealing with uncertainty in that team? So that's really interesting things to think about. So I would love to hear more once you have more answers to that. That's
I think I do. I was listening to a couple of founders that they've exited their businesses and sold it and like made a lot of money and grew a big globally successful business. And I was listening to them talk last night, and one of the things that I observed in that conversation was their tolerance for failure at the front line, I think, made them the great leaders that their teams think they are. So they talked about their startup journey going from like nothing to something really big over 20 years. And they talked about in the first few years, like there was a lot of challenges, but somewhere in the middle of that process, like they drank the agile Kool-Aid and then they talked about like everything was still rubbish, right? The estimates were still bad. There were still problems getting product out to market. We were still trying to do too many things. Like all these things were true, but it was so much better than how things were before. So rather than mess with it, we just accepted the frustrations and kept on going. And I think that acceptance that things won't be perfect was one of the dynamics in that environment that enabled them to be successful.
I really like that, because indeed I just before this talk I was reminded this week about the movie It Might Get Loud with The Edge and Jack White and I can't come up with the other another guitarist. Too bad that I can't come up with the name. But the interesting part I wanted to talk about is The Edge talked about when he started as a guitarist, that listening to the punk rock, and he basically said like, oh, all of a sudden I realized it didn't matter how good or how bad we were. It mattered about the energy, and we wanted to play, and we knew that we were not good, but it didn't matter. We just wanted to become better, and we just wanted to have the energy to come across. And like before he had the idea, before he met punk rock in a way, he had the idea, oh, musicians, they have to be perfect and they have to be perfect, great things. And all of a sudden punk rock was there and it's like, you can do anything. You can play 2 notes, 3 notes, 4 chords, whatever. It's enough. You can just go out on the stage and have fun, and then gradually become a world-class guitarist or world-class drummer and whatever, to just become so much better. And that's a little bit the story that you tell about these startups. Like, okay, it wasn't perfect, but there was already something, and we knew it was better than what we had before. That's that kind of thing I'm hearing. Thank you for adding that, because I think a lot of us, we see that somewhere in some parts of our culture, but I think it's indeed needed, or maybe it's not needed for everybody, but definitely for me, that was also something like unit tests helped me to see, okay, this is working, that's not working. I get a base level, and to keep that quality in, for example, at multiple levels. Okay, I want to move to that next question about, and that's kind of almost the opposite as the failure part, is that what do you consider your biggest achievement, or the biggest achievement so far? And before we go into that, maybe the question before is that, is it, because this is basically a question about this is giving you the opportunity to brag. So my question is that easy for you to brag, to really be proud of the things that you did? Is that something that is easy for you?
No, not really. I mean, I don't mind talking about things, but I don't, like, I've had a couple of conversations about this, and people ask me, one of the, you're a bit weird, Craig. What is that weirdness? And I think a very low need for external validation. So, you can ask me a question, I can give you the facts, but I don't really care what you think. And of course, all facts are subjective, so they're my facts, not the objective facts. But look, I think one of the things that I really like, here I am at early 50s now, and I've done, looking back at my career, I feel like I've done a lot of interesting things, and I've had a lot of fun, and I've worked with a lot of really interesting people, and I think I've really enjoyed the journey. Not every week has been good, and there's been some tight spots and all that sort of stuff, but it's been very rewarding despite the challenges. And over the years, I've looked at difficult challenges and stepped into them and embraced them and had a go and to see what would happen. I do remember one thing, and I think I was probably around my early 30s or late 20s, and just having one of those tough project moments and just going, what's the worst that could happen? And the worst that could happen would be I'd be back in the recession from 1992, and I'd be stacking shelves at the supermarket, or cleaning up the local theatre, or serving drinks in a bar or something like that. And it's not the worst life. I'd get up and I'd go to the beach in the morning, and I'd eat healthier because I wouldn't be going out, and I'd everything would be fine, right? It's not the end of the world. But and I've probably had 2 or 3 of those moments where, facing bleak prospects, are you going to get fired or stuff like that, I've just gone, properly introspecting on that and just going, what's the worst that could happen right now? And I think it's hard to be as phlegmatic about that if you've kind of over leveraged yourself with your mortgage, and you've got 4 kids that depend on you, and all that sort of stuff. It's difficult, right? Now I would say, we've got a company, there's approaching 250 people working in it, and so the work that I do, there's 250 people plus their families, depending on the good judgment that we apply to the work we do. And to date, we've been pretty successful despite the war, the recession, or whatever it is that's going on, the pandemic, and so forth, right? So I think we've pulled it off, and I think as we come out of the challenges that we've been facing this last 6 months, which don't feel as acute as the pandemic, but there's still challenges. I think, I think as we pull out of this, right, I'm going to be quite proud of what we've become as an organization, right? There's
just to go back to what you started earlier on. You said this is something this company you started about 5 years ago. Is that do I remember correctly?
We started this company in 2018, December. So we started in December 2018, and 15 months into the company, we hit the pandemic, and that was a rough, probably 6 months, and then started to recover, and then things went pretty well for another 20 odd months, and then late last year, the economic conditions and all the layoffs and stuff started happening, and that's generated more uncertainty and more turbulence. But we're getting through it fine, and I think as an organization, right, we're still figuring out some things about how to grow this organization and how to manage it and run it and so forth. But we're very invested in it being a place that people can thrive. And I think that story that I told you from Juan, right? We're a team that look after each other and pursue continuous improvement, continuous learning, right? Across our organization, all our teams are like that. And if you go grab any one person and you have a conversation with them, you meet possibly one of the most interesting people you've ever met, right? Because they're all so human, and they've got such diversity, and they've got such interesting backgrounds, and they've got such interesting insights in, how the world is and how work is and all this sort of stuff. But it's not just on how to be an agile team or how to build a particular product. It's a view on how the world should be, right? And it's cool. They're amazing people. And so the thing that I'm most proud of is having helped cultivate this group of people in this one spot. And, I'm quite excited by them.
And during rough times, I would add, because like you said, just 2 years in pandemic.
True. And maybe those rough times have been partly of what has forged this culture of looking after each other. Yeah.
I think that is true. If you can create something in the very early starts, and of course that's not what we hope to, but if that happens, well, at least we can use the negative parts of it in a way to also see, okay, how can we create a culture where it becomes a culture where people care about each other. That's what I'm hearing, and that's a nice.
Yeah. I think the defining attributes of our company, like there's things around paying attention to quality and caring about customer impact and all that sort of stuff. They're important, but I think we consider them second tier things. I think the things that are the primary cultural dimensions of this company are look after each other and be kind, which I think is weird, but I'm really, really happy that that's the way it's turning out.
And in these kind of times, rough times, especially important, I would say.
Yeah, okay. And hopefully when these rough times kind of ease off, that still remains the dominant part of the culture, right? Like it's this forging moment, right? And then like in 10 years' time, where everyone's having a great time and climate's been solved and there are no wars and AI are running the world and we're all like thriving. We're this like place where people hang out and love working with each other and love each other and love each other's company.
I like that. That's a future I definitely want to be part of, and that's if you can create a company where that kind of culture is created in these hard times, but like you say, hopefully it stays. That's really a world I want to be part of. So that's thank you for creating such a company, because it's indeed the kind of life that I think a lot of us will want to have, especially in these rough times. I want to move to that next question that is kind of related. Well, depends on how you answer it, but I can imagine that it's related. Is that, do you have a personal agility tip to share? Is there any way that you work or that you think it's really important about
We have the post-it notes on the wall. That's a technique for when I've got too much stuff to keep in my head. I have to put it outside my head. I've got like dozens of digital apps where I've abandoned lists of things to do and sorting of things and all that sort of stuff. The old post-it notes on the wall always rescues me when I'm drowning in complexity. And the other thing is the Pomodoro, right? If I've ever got a hard deadline and I'm falling behind and I've just got like, hardcore smash it out type work to do, to pull in the 20-minute Pomodoros and the post-it notes on the wall. Remote working, digital work, all that sort of stuff. Nothing beats the old-fashioned forcing constraint of a handful of post-its and a Sharpie.
It's interesting that indeed these are the kind of starting things of Agile 20 years ago, when we didn't have any of these digital tools. So we kind of were forced to use Post-its. And now we have all these digital tools, but like you say, many of us, and there's lots of Post-its around me, actually in front of me, so I can't show it through the camera. But that's, that is indeed something that is a big part of our world for many people. And we try to create it in many different ways, in a digital way. And sometimes when we work remotely, it's handy to share stuff. But for our personal way of working, most of us come back to Post-its. And I've been using Pomodoro a lot, especially in the early 2000s. But for the people that don't know it, could you say just in a few minutes, what is Pomodoro for you and how do you use it?
Oh, Google the Pomodoro technique. But ultimately, it's working in personal 20-minute sprints. And, so you try to do 2 or 3 sprints in a row, have a break, do 2 or 3 sprints in a row, have a break. And, there's techniques for managing interruptions and managing focus and so forth. But it's basically that hard constraint of there's a deadline that you've given yourself, and it forces you to work faster towards completing a task. It also forces you to think about how to break the task down into a 20-minute increment. So it's a great technique. It's a great technique, and it kind of lines up with all those agile and sprint based techniques around like small stories and like a straight line to value and all that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, I used to call it a focus technique, because it also tells the people around you, let's not disturb during this 20-minute break. Of course, if there is a fire, if there is a big problem, you can interrupt me, because that big problem is more important. But in general, most things people can wait for 20 minutes, and then I can focus. And that usually helps. The fact that I can also just show them a timer, say, wait a minute, this is my little tomato that shows you that I'm still working and focusing another 5 to 7 minutes. People will leave me alone, and that's the kind of thing. It's like you say, it's these basic agile things that are helping a lot of people. I want to move to that next question, and I'm really looking forward to your answer to that, because this is about remote working. And what I understand is that you created your company in a way that you can work remotely a lot with a lot of people from different kind of continents. So I'm really
my co-founder. Yeah, go on.
Go ahead.
My co-founder in the business is in Bangalore. That's where he lives. And our first 3 or 4 team members were in Bangalore. And now our team's about half Australia and India, and a handful of people in other countries around the world. So we started the business having to work interacting online and video calls and so forth. It's the age of the internet. And I found that it slows you down a little bit, because like using Miro versus a whiteboard, it's there's a slight lag in the interactions, and like we've been talking, every now and again you talk over each other and you have to back up and start again, and so there's a lag there. But I think it's a bit like when people get fixated on are you a C++ developer versus are you a software engineer, right? Like, where the work happens isn't in those little moments of friction. Where the work happens is in those broader, deeper thinking and understanding parts of the process. And with remote working, I think teams are social constructs, and interactions and listening and learning and understanding together is a really important thing. And so the techniques around slowing down and listening are the really important things. And of course, like we all, and the less experienced we are, the more inclined we are, want to rush forward to the solution and start building towards the solution. But the more we can kind of hold back and listen, the better the outcomes will be. And I think that's one part of it. And then the other part of like this remote working thing is we have to make space and time to appreciate each other as human beings. And so instead of going out to dinner together, we can't do that. So what are we going to do instead, right? And so, I remember in 2020 randomly turning up to some of our teams and inviting them to go play Among Us together. And so it was fun, right? Like we'd get on the spaceship and they'd run around and they'd all try to murder the boss. It was fun. And just like 15 minutes of playing like that lifts the spirits and makes people have fun together, and there's laughter in the room. One of the measures that we look for, one of the measures is the wrong word, one of the indicators that we look for, one of the performance indicators is there laughter on a team. And when the agile transformations and the teaching of XP and Scrum and bringing individuals together as a team was happening all those years ago, you would walk into these offices and everyone was sitting quietly at their desks. And then like a few months later, after you've kind of done your intervention with them, you'd have people chatting to each other, working at the same computer, there'd be laughter, they'd be telling stories to each other, and it was a fun place to be. When we've gone to remote working, like we've kind of put barriers in place, we can't do those same things. They don't organically happen. We've got to, as leaders and managers, we've got to facilitate the space for these human connections. Right? Back to trust, rapport, appreciation, understanding, and what are we doing to enable those things? So, there's lots of people talking about how to do it, but like making the space and time to do it, I think is the really important step.
I really like that you stretch it out, because indeed when you walk into a team that is working that way, you immediately kind of have a feel of how things are going. You walk in and everybody's quiet, not talking to each other. Something's wrong. They might be under a lot of stress or whatever, something is there. And if there's a lot of laughter, you kind of know, okay, it's kind of okay. And so remote, that's a lot harder. It actually would be really interested if Zoom and all these kind of tools had a way to to figure out how much is there laughter, how much is there, what kind of interaction, and tools like that. If AI could give us that kind of information, that would already be interesting. It's dangerous because they can interpret it in a completely wrong way. Again, talking about cultures, the interaction in India is different than we have it, than we might have it in Melbourne. But still, there could be things that could be told that way. That's really interesting, and I like that you stress out that it's important to as a manager, as a leader, to make time for it, because that's the kind of thing that I think makes a difference in a remote world. In a physical world, it's kind of automatically, but in a remote world, we need to teach people, hey, this is normal. This is how you can interact. It's not just being on the screen for hard work together, but it's also normal to have a laughter together and to have fun together while doing the work. I'm not a big believer in having what's it called, team building activities if you don't have a team. For me, it's like you build a team by doing things together and having fun, and then the extra thing of team building is interesting, but you first need to have a team that is already at the basic level or some of these things.
So we have to make space. And again, like what is your goal, right? Appreciation, respect, rapport, right? So what are the things, and depending on the team, like playing games may or may not work for people, right? You've got to look at the specific people in front of you and work with them on creating the right methods and tools.
Exactly.
Which is another agile concept, right? And follow somebody else's playbook and adapt to success.
Okay, let's move to that next question about a book. What's a book that you want to bring here?
So this book I told you about before we got together, written by Sam Walker, who I believe is a sports journalist, and I heard him interviewed on the radio, and he was really interesting. The book itself talks about the patterns of great or the behaviors of great leaders. And so what the book's broken into a couple of different parts. The early part is, where's a great place to see the behaviors of the best performing leaders, right? And he looks at 100 odd years of sports history and sorts of down 15 sports teams of all time, right? They're across different disciplines. There's netball, there's Australian rules football, there's basketball, there's cricket. There's all sorts of different sports in there, but they're all team sports. And then the next thing is he does this sorting of like, what are the attributes of those teams that makes them stand apart from everyone else. So this isn't good. This is the best of the best, right? And so he narrows it down. One interesting thing is he looks at coaching and says, does coaching make a difference? Coaching is important, but coaching is not the thing that makes the best performing team start up. Into a bunch of management theory from Richard Hackman. Richard Hackman, I think when I studied business degree when I was like 21 or thereabouts, like I heard of Richard Hackman, but his writings and theories made no impact on me at all. But when I was doing that master's degree, I reacquainted myself with him, and I found he's the guy that basically formed kind of the modern version of what we think of as teams, like a shared goal and a culture and all that sort of stuff. And his big deal was about like, what are high performing teams? So there's this, and I think there's this thread of psychology that kind of, connects it as well. Right. But, Sam in his book, he comes up with like a handful of things that leaders need to do to, so what is the things that really stand apart? It's not coaches, because every great team has got great coaches, but like the best of the best, what really makes the difference? And his thesis is it's the team captain and the behaviors of the team captain. And so that the behaviors of the team captains are that they have a deep understanding of how the team needs to work to be successful, right? So they know what good looks like, not just in terms of the product outcome, but like, operating together. If you're a soccer team, you know how to communicate on the field, you know how to play your strategies, you know enough to be able to see what good looks like and help the team see what good looks like. The second one is you know how to dive in and coach and mentor to burning of you as a leader on that team are making on-field calls about like what to do and where. So that might, again, back on the soccer field, manifest as Eves, get over there, right? Because you see that a defensive position needs to be set up or whatever. But also there's post-game, right? Like having a conversation about like, did you see that thing? Why did you not be there when I needed you to be there? And those type of conversations. Coaches give feedback to the teams off the field, right? So the game happens and then in comes the feedback. You watch the videos, you have the conversations and so forth. Captains are giving you feedback on the field. So there's continuous feedback based on the risks and priorities that need to be addressed. And so that intensity of feedback can mean that you can be direct rather than more rhetoric in your feedback, but or in your telling people what to do. But people appreciate it because it's like working together and we've got like skin in the game together and so forth. And the next one is you all know this one as well. We would rather have a manager that's a chronic arsehole than somebody who's good one day and bad the next, because what we're looking for is emotional stability, reliability. We want to be able to forecast or anticipate what's going to happen when we have an interaction with that person. And so people that are emotionally level and mature are easier for team members to bring problems to or become vulnerable in front of and so forth.
So the stability is more important. So
knows when to break the rules.
Yeah, it's interesting that
Sorry,
I was going to the thing that you said about that person, that so the leader, it's the stability that's really important, that if he or she is an asshole, if it's the same kind of asshole the same day or every day, it's more or it's easier to deal with than if you have ups and lows. That's what I'm hearing.
Right. He's an asshole, but he's our asshole.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the last one in those 4 points was great leaders know when to break the rules.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a status quo in place, or there's rules that are assumed to be true, and great leaders know when to change the environment so that the team can be more successful. Puts me in mind of that Captain Kirk Kobayashi Maru story, right? Yeah. Anyway, there you go. I think it's a brilliant book. It's full of like anecdotes of like sporting games. And not everyone loves sports, but like I think they are fairly universal in terms of things that we can understand. And I think it puts this deeply important management theory in a context that's accessible to a lot of people. So I highly recommend the book.
Great. So another book on my list to read. That's the disadvantage of listening. Or it's the advantage and the same disadvantage at the same time. I learn about a lot of books, but I don't have time to read it because I have to edit all these things. But anyway, I love to read. So it sounds like a book that's interesting to me. I want to move to, for me, one of the most interesting questions is that, what question do you think I should also ask you, and what's the answer?
Yeah. Look, I've enjoyed talking to you. I look forward to when I can come to Europe and hang out and give you a call and meet up in a coffee shop and talk at more length. We've gone over time, so I don't need to draw it out anymore. But I very much appreciated the conversation. It's been lovely talking to you after all these years of reading your writings online and watching some of your speeches online and so forth. So it's been great.
So no extra thing that you think that there's no
that
you want to know. Okay, I definitely can. No. Yeah. It's been a challenging conversation anyway. And I think we moved already in multiple directions. So thank you for that. And before we end up, of course, what I would like to know is, who do you think I should ask next?
I'll broker this introduction to you if you like. There's a woman I worked with called Sarah McGeehan, and
I think that's her, right?
As far as I know, she's That's right. She's an executive. She works at a company called NBN Co in Australia, which is about managing and rolling out the national fiber network, which is a really important thing for us all. I worked for her at Telstra for a while, more than a decade ago now. She's not in the agile world, right? She's an executive that lives outside that space, but she sees the value that it brings both culturally and in terms of performance. And it's one of the tools that she uses to achieve. And I think she mainly plays a culture game, but like she achieves business outcomes. And her depth of understanding of the stuff inside the agile box is like, I don't know, like 10 years ago it was okay, but she didn't know the details. Maybe she probably knows more now. But I think she's got a really interesting perspective on what agile can do for organizations, particularly large organizations, from an outsider's point of view. And so that's why I think, and on top of that, she's a brilliant woman, and she's a great storyteller. So I think, I think she'd be a great person to talk to.
That's you say you broke the rules, but for me, it's kind of a little bit. I want to learn extra interesting people who are sometimes also at the border of agile, and that could be the people who were the beginners, maybe the new people, but also people who might be at others, like using agile a little bit, like you say, an executive. These kind of people, I'm really interested that if they understand the agile mindset. For me, this is the extra interesting people to talk to, because they will tell us a little bit on, how is business looking at agile? How are we applying it? What is useful about it? And maybe what's old fashioned in a way that's 20 years ago that was interesting, but from a business point of view, less. So definitely interesting kind of person to talk to. Now, it's been an interesting 2 hours to talk. We've been lots of challenges. Technically, I have to edit to see how much we can get it, because definitely having a conversation across the world was kind of interesting. But if people want to get to contact you, what would be the best way to contact you?
I think if you look up Everest Engineering and you find me that way, like we're a product, that's us. We're a product development agency. We work with a lot of SaaS companies. We work with a few bigs, and we work with tons of startups. We love sharing stories and showing a way to be more effective and doing the work. And it's just kind of a fun place to work. So if people want to talk to us, that's mainly what we're interested in talking about. But there's also a conference that we're re-establishing after the pandemic. And so if people are interested in the conferences as well, get in touch. Look forward to hearing from you.
Yes, I'd like you said, definitely when you're in Europe, let's make sure that we can meet up and see. Australia has been on my to-do list or my bucket list to once go and see. There's definitely a few people over there that have been asking if I was interested in going for conferences. These kind of recordings are my way of keeping touch with everybody around the world without having to leave my house for personal reasons. But I'm definitely interested into seeing in the future what else we can do. So thank you very much for your time. It's I think it's about 9 o'clock or around that at your side. It's almost midnight here, so it's interesting to have this kind of conversations across the globe. And I'll definitely let you know how when this recording go live. So thank you very much for your time.
Been a pleasure.
Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.